Hey everyone, this is Donald Keefe, Professor of Art at the School of Visual Art and Design. This is a demonstration video for Painting 1. I'll be making this painting that you see here. It's just a little still life using household items in a cardboard box with a light on them. Very simple. We'll be using the indirect painting method, which is what we focus on in Painting 1. And this method is a good transition, I feel, coming from drawing. It's more value-based, and we basically developed the painting with a value-based underpainting, either black and white or in this case brown and white. And the color is added with transparent glazes right over your value-based underpainting. This is the method used by the old masters, and it's the method that we will be using here as well. I hope you enjoy the demo. And what you'll see is I have created the still life, and just to speed the process along, I took a photo of my still life and I printed it, and I'm doing what we call a graphite transfer. You can see that here. I'm just rubbing graphite on the back of the print. This is just a time-saving thing that I did for the purpose of this demo, but it's a helpful thing you can do. Once you put the graphite on the back, I put some tape on the corners here to create some hinges, and I will be tracing the image here, and that tracing is actually going to transfer that graphite right onto my canvas there. There is transfer paper and different things you can get, but for this I just used a 6B graphite stick, or you could use another kind of graphite pencil. You'd want to use something in the B range that's softer and darker. Avoid any H pencils for that process. And I'm just drawing the contours and the shadow shapes, just like you see here. Okay, so here you can see I'm checking the transfer. Everything transferred well. I can get rid of my print. And I don't do that all the time. It's always better to work from life, train your eyes, but sometimes you have photographic references or other things. Now I'm just crispening up my borders and a few lines here, checking if there's any areas I miss, and I'm blocking in. I know it's a little hard to see because the light. But I'm blocking in some of my dark values, shadow shapes, things like this. This is going to be just going to help me see the forms a little bit better when I start the painting. Okay, so that can you saw there briefly was a can of spray fixative. I take the drawing, I spray it, so that way when I paint over it, the graphite's not going to run. If you don't spray fixative, you can use hairspray, but that's what that is. So I'm putting a base coat, just sort of a base tone. It's good to work from a mid-tone value here. I put that in, then I use the rag to wipe out some of the highlights, and I'm blocking in my darks. So in oil paint, generally you're going to want to work dark to light. So I'm starting from a mid-tone. I push the darks first, and then I'll go in with my lights. There's a few sort of rules to be aware of. You want to work fat over lean, or another way to put that is thin over thick. So my first layer I've thinned with Gamsol, which is basically odorless mineral spirits, and some oil. And as I build up layers, I need to increase the amount of oil. That's basically the fat. The mineral spirits is basically makes the paint lean. You don't want to overdo that, especially in subsequent layers. You really don't want to add any solvent because you'll be deteriorating the paint film. So I'm just blocking in my darks and my shadows and etc. And I'll just let you guys watch that. Okay, so the base tone I used, the color was yellow ochre, which is a semi-transparent kind of earthy yellow. And the colors I'm using that you see I've mixed the value scale of is burnt umber, and you've used ultramarine blue to mix with that to get towards black. And I've also added white. You don't want to have your blue and your white mix, at least I'm not, so I'm just using the blue on the darker end of the value scale just for the last 2, maybe 3 values. Everything else is the burnt umber or the burnt umber added with white. That would be the left side. It's important to take some time to pre-mix your colors. It's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to help you have more consistency in your painting. And also, especially when you're dealing with color, taking notes as to what pigments and what percentages of each pigment you're using. That's really important. It's going to save you a lot of time if you have to revisit areas or do touch-up. You don't want to be doing a lot of guesswork as to what color or colors you mix together to get what you're using in the painting.
For you and me, in hopes that we would see
Alright, you'll see I have this stick that I'm resting my wrist on. That's called a maul stick. It's just a dowel rod with, I put a tennis ball on the end with a rag over it. That's really helpful to do small detailed work. It'd be very hard to keep your wrist steady when you're doing that. It's helpful also if you're working vertically. And it just keeps your hand from smearing the artwork. Now I mentioned I was using burnt umber and ultramarine blue. And basically my value scale I've made here is I'm using opaque colors. So in the underpainting stage of an indirect painting, you want to use opaque colors. For my initial tone with the yellow ochre, that was semi-transparent. I wanted that to be able to see the drawing underneath that. But for all of these, I'm using opaque colors. Ultramarine blue, yes, is transparent, but I'm mixing it with the burnt umber to get an opaque kind of black color. I'm using titanium white, which is opaque, versus say zinc white, which is transparent. But basically you build up opaque layers, and I'm not addressing color, I'm addressing value here. Even though it's in browns, yes, and I have the blue I'm adding a little bit. It's basically a drawing. We would speak of this as a drawing essentially. It's a value-based painting. The color will come after this. But if you can draw, and you feel confident you're drawing, if you've taken drawing 1 and you did well in that, coming into this, yes, you're learning to use brushes in a different medium, but it's essentially a drawing, and that's a good way to think about it. So you would want all your values represented, your contour edges, composition, all of these things that you would normally think about with drawing. It's just here, it's in paint, and the underpainting can be really kind of any color. I'm using a traditional approach, which would be the umbers. Another traditional approach would be black and white. Some artists have used greens as well, but there's Basically, the idea is you're just establishing a value based underpainting, and the color will go on transparently over that. So you can use really any color. I like using these earth colors. They're inexpensive um, versus like a cadmium color. Those are quite expensive. You wouldn't want to do underpainting with that. If you think about the old masters, they a lot of times like colors like blue, lapis lazuli was very expensive. So they would do uh, the painting in these earth tones, which are inexpensive, and then they would reserve the rich colors for transparent glazes, which they didn't need to use a lot of the pigments for that. So you're using your less expensive paints to do a lot of the work in this painting approach. You'll hopefully have noticed that I've been changing my brush size too. When I first started, I was using large brushes, and now I'm using much smaller ones. And I've also, the less marks are basically with the tiniest brush and doing the really bright highlights and some linear work. So as you're working, you want to work general to specific. So you can think what tools are going to permit me to work general to specific. So using a large brush early on, you'll get a lot of work done, and you decrease your brush size as you narrow in on those details. You would not want to start a painting with a really tiny brush. It's going to be a lot of work, and also the eye just enjoys that variety of mark. Large marks, small marks. The eye is going to enjoy those. If everything was so uniform, um, it's our brain doesn't enjoy that as much. And we might look at some Baroque paintings or something, or a Raphael, and think they're so sort of polished. But a lot of times, if you look closely, you'll see the brush marks. So if you want a very smooth painting, you might want to add some more like varnish into your mix. And there's different oil paint mediums as well that will permit that kind of effect as well. Usually on a painting, the white areas and the highlights are built up the most, and that's because every time you work, you kind of find yourself retouching those, and you'll see when I get into color as well, I will revisit those highlights from time to time. Okay, so now we're going to get into the color. I have my value-based underpainting established, and now I have I'm putting the glazes of color. So in E-class I have a list of the pigments I'm using, but I think I'm using Hansa yellow, which is a more transparent yellow. I have a transparent earth yellow, which is what I'm using right now to kind of get that cardboard color. I have Perylene red, which is a transparent red. I have the ultramarine blue again. I think I have a transparent orange, and trying to remember. Sorry, it's not right before me at the moment. I'm doing the voiceover after, but I have a variety of colors. I have phthalo turquoise in there as well. So basically, all the colors I have selected for this stage are transparent pigments. You need to be aware of the pigments and get familiar with them. Which ones are opaque, which ones are transparent. And I would not want to be doing glazes with opaque color. You will ruin your painting. So I'm doing it with transparent pigments. Be sure to do that. I'm also using a good amount of oil medium because we are working fat over lean. Now I should clarify that there was a gap between a time gap between the underpainting and the overpainting, which is what you're seeing now. And that time gap is to allow the underpainting to dry. That's really vital. You absolutely have to let the underpainting dry. If you try doing glazes on top of it, you will ruin it. The underpainting needs to be totally dry, and essentially needs to look like a finished painting in a value scale. Once that's dry, you will be doing the overpainting, which is what we call this with the glazes. And you're essentially just putting a color filter over your value study. And it's kind of like wearing sunglasses, those kind that have the color in the lenses, and everything is kind of tinted that color. So that's the idea, essentially. So you'll see that every object and every part of this will get treated with transparent color, and but you are seeing through that transparent color to the value underpainting, the value-based underpainting. This is a great way to create luminosity in paint, especially oil paint. Impressionist painting, which uses all opaque color and does not allow for layers to dry. It's usually done what we call wet into wet or alla prima, all done at once. This indirect method, you're letting layers dry, and then once they're dry, you do glazes. But that allows for luminosity that you can't get with just using opaque paint. And essentially, light is traveling through your transparent glazes and bouncing off of your underpainting, and areas that have highlights are reflecting more light. And if you're wise with your composition, you can actually give the painting an appearance as if there's an inner glow, almost like there's a light within the painting. And that's a really special thing. You can achieve that in acrylic too. It's a little harder for other reasons, pigment particle size. But this is one of the unique things that oil paint, and in particular using the indirect painting method, can give you that luminosity that we love so much of artists like Caravaggio, for instance, or Rembrandt. Okay, so you see, after my glazing, I'm just touching up a few highlights. Whenever you glaze, it's important to keep in mind that you are actually darkening your values underneath. So a lot of times it's necessary to revisit the highlight some. And even after revisiting those highlights, you might let that touched up highlight dry and then go back again with a subtle transparent glaze again, just to sort of marry it to the picture a little bit more. But as I said, it's this process of transparent and then opaque retouch-ups, transparent, opaque retouch-ups that gives the highlight areas a thicker, there's just thicker buildup of paint. One thing to keep in mind is if you find yourself doing a lot of touch-up to the underpainting at this stage, when you're supposed to be just glazing, that means you probably didn't get the underpainting done in a good way. So the underpainting needs to be basically a finished painting in a value scale. All you're doing at this stage is putting color filters and revisiting a few highlights. And there you see the finished thing. I think I did a little bit more at beyond that as well. So hope you guys enjoyed that vid demo. Hope it gives you some insight in what you can do, and I'll look forward to seeing your art projects and paintings in the indirect method. God bless. I'll talk to you later.